Welcome to the Nerds and Friends podcast. I'm Josh Lindquist, and today we are joined by my co-hosts, Caleb Whittle and Will Shaw. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we continue,
how's it going?
Oh, doing great. Before we continue, everyone be sure to follow Will Shaw Art on Instagram to see his awesome art, and follow CW on Instagram for Caleb, right?
Caleb J. Whittle.
Caleb J. Whittle. There we go. It's CW on Twitter.
On Twitter, but my most active platform is actually LinkedIn. So
nice.
You can look me up there.
Look up Caleb Whittle, spelled Whittle, and follow all of his awesome entrepreneur content because you will learn a ton.
Thank you.
And you post your other podcast on LinkedIn as well, correct?
I did, yeah. So it's available on all platforms except for Apple because they take forever to verify your podcast.
They do take forever to verify your podcast.
It's called Everyday Intrapreneurs. So it's about like people who are entrepreneurs inside of an organization. So that's awesome. Just launched last week.
Congratulations. That's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I've been downloading that and listening to your first episode when I have free time. So
appreciate it. Yeah. Hopefully I didn't bore you too much because the first episode is just me talking to myself.
Got to do it sometimes, you know.
It takes a little bit to get into like that rhythm of whenever you're doing a new thing.
Yep. So I'm very graciously thankful for the first two people I had on because I was like, listen, this is the first time I'm doing it. Like, you have to bear with me. May not get a ton of listeners, but you're the first. So
that's prestigious.
You're in at the ground floor.
Exactly.
That's fantastic.
Gotta get that hard sell in.
Oh yeah. So what has been your biggest takeaway from running your own podcast so far?
Probably that I don't need to edit as much as I do. I use a platform that's actually really cool. It's called Descript. And you edit, like it transcribes your podcast or video or whatever, and then you edit by editing the transcript. So if there's like an you delete and it'll delete it in the video and audio. So it's like
that's good.
Really cool. And you have 2 hours of transcription when you start before you have to like upgrade.
Wow.
So
it's free for the initial 2 hours?
Yeah, it's free for those 2 hours. You can get crafty if you have other emails as well. I'm not
we'll edit that out.
Or denying things. But that's actually been really cool. I mean, and it also has like an AI component where like you can click shorten word gaps and you can choose like any gap that is longer than a half a second, shortened to a quarter of a second. And it'll
that's
do
genius.
The downside is,
Josh, can we get that?
We can.
Sometimes if your guest like backs away from the mic or like trails off, it'll think that like that's part of a gap. So you want to make sure you listen to the whole thing and like edit along the way. So then you're like, oh wait, no, don't cut this out. I don't know if it adds more time or not, having to go back and correct, but that's pretty cool. You can also remove filler words, just all of them.
That's pretty awesome.
But it may also recognize like if they trail off again and it's like, oh, this is a filler word. So, I mean, you want to double check as a human, but it's pretty slick. It's pretty cool.
I need that for like real life.
Yes.
Like desperately.
That's brilliant. That's me and Caleb before you came on, Will, we just talk about how much we love modern technology and all of the things it has for connecting and doing podcasts and getting your work out there. And because I tried out this app called Wisdom. Shout out to them. Hopefully they'll somehow pay me money for this. No, I'm just kidding. But I tried this new Wisdom app, which is kind of like you go on and you're just kind of like live and people can ask you questions or you can hop on their conversations. And yeah, it was cool. I just went on there. I didn't know what I was doing. So I was like, ask me about my book, and people came on and did, and it was awesome. So
yeah. So one way of getting some publicity.
Yeah. I got my first positive review for my book like the other day, or I was like, someone wrote like a big paragraph and I was like, oh.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very nice.
That reminds me, mine is currently in draft, so I should probably hit submit.
Oh, thank you.
I'm like, first one, I was like, I didn't write a super long paragraph. Oh, wait, I haven't hit submit yet.
No, but this person was like, to be honest, when I got this, I know it's your first book and it's self-published. I thought it was going to be garbage, but it was actually really good. And I was like, well, thank you. So that was awesome. Yeah.
That's high praise.
It
Congrats.
is. Yeah. Thank you.
That first review is always the most special, right? Like, regardless of what you're selling, like even in my world, like marketing stuff, your first review of marketing is like, okay, this feels good.
Yeah. Well, Caleb, you were actually the second person to read this ever.
Ooh.
Yeah, you were the second person to read it. My brother was the first one to read it, and then you were the second.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you.
It was cool. It was the first book I read on Kindle Paperwhite.
Oh, nice.
So like that was cool too. Of like, oh, I just have to tap it. It turns the page, and oh, I can read at night now, and it's not like uber bright and really annoying. And yeah, it was a positive reading experience.
Thank you.
And your book, like your book was the second one that I've read that is fiction or fantasy that isn't like a self-help or like business book or something. And after that, I'm like, I should just always have a book I'm reading that's like not advice. just to let my mind wander for a bit. Because I have this list of like 140 books I want to read. Not this year, just read.
That's good.
And I'm on book 9 this year.
Hey, that's progress, man. That's good.
So it's a mix of Kindle, paperback, and audio. When I take
audiobooks. I'm trying to figure out how to do an audiobook of my book, but I guess there's talking to an author we had on the show here. She was talking about how you have to edit a certain way where it's like each chapter gets plugged in. Where you do an audio file for each chapter, and there's some technical stuff that I was like, that went over my head. So it's not like I can just have my brother hop on Audacity and do it or something, you know. A little more complicated than that. So I was like,
a little. Okay. And life hack. So I take about an hour walk to and from the park with my dog every day. I have been. And I'm like, okay, I have an hour. Ooh, I can listen to this audiobook at 1.5 speed and get through it, 1.5 times faster. So the ability to speed up, you're like racing against time there, where you're like, oh, cool, I can read a book. Oh, it says 14 hours. I'll get it done in 9.
Yeah.
Nice.
I was actually listening back to a different podcast we had done earlier, and I was turning up the speed, and I was like, oh my gosh, my voice sounds so much better when I don't have to wait for me to speak.
What? Your voice sounds fine normally, Will.
Yeah, but I have like these awkward pauses in the middle. I feel like I speak naturally at like half speed, so being able to turn that up to like 2 or 3 times speed, I'm like, oh, it's like listening to a human talk.
As opposed to an artist.
I'm listening to Matthew McConaughey's book right now. And he is the voice in the audiobook. So it's very Matthew McConaughey. And he's like, it's all about living, man. And he's like talking really slow. So that on 1.5 speed, I'm like, oh, I can actually like get through what he's saying now.
That's fantastic. I was muting myself for a moment because I live next to a fire station and there were sirens.
I feel the pain. Yes. I also live next to a fire station.
Yep.
As I think I've mentioned before.
Yeah, it's we're fire station brothers. Caleb, do you live near a fire station?
I do not.
You live near an airport though, right?
I do live near an airport and near an Air Force base. So I have F-22s every day at about 3 p.m. that fly super low because they're coming into land just over the way. So it's very annoying, especially when you're trying to record a podcast.
That would do it. Hold for plane. That's what we say on set whenever we
just raise my hand.
You've heard that. You've been on set, Caleb. You've heard hold for plane.
I have. Yeah.
Hold for helicopter. On this movie we're working on, we found a great forest area to film at, but nearby there's like a police training academy. So we'll be like, hold for gunfire. And it sucks.
Is there gunfire in your film at all? Because you could use that to your advantage.
There's one scene of gunfire, but it's like 2 shots. That's it.
Yeah, that could be some really good effects if you just time the recording just right.
But yeah, no, it's when we're trying to do dialogue, it's like, why? Why?
I'm
Yeah.
sure there's some guy with like a scope just sitting over there. Wait, hold. Okay, they're talking. Go, go, go.
Let's mess with that film crew. Go.
Fire
Open
at
fire.
will.
Open fire.
Josh, have you had to be in charge of location at all in your role?
I have.
And like, how do you decide where or like what locations to use? Or
It comes down to where, because this movie I'm working on, it is very low budget. So we go to where the permits are cheapest.
okay.
So that really dictates. And it's typically areas where it's like, hey, if you're a low budget film, you don't need a permit as long as you don't obstruct people. It's like parks and stuff, where it's like, as long as you don't obstruct other people using the park, you're fine. And so we'll do stuff like that. But on stuff where there's licensed, like where you have the permits and the insurance and everything, then it just becomes about the rules of whatever place you're utilizing, like a location. They'll have a set of rules that you sign for a contract, like only plug in your lights on these marked sockets and not the other ones, so you don't overload the electricity. It's stuff like that, to where usually you'll have a location rep who their only job is to do that. They don't work for the production or the location. They're just kind of like a middle person. And that's a good job. I've looked into doing that some more too. It's just hard to get in the door, but yeah, they just manage the location, parameters and all that. But sometimes when you're on lower budget stuff, you'll just, as a producer, be in charge of making sure, hey, don't screw that up, because the location will be very mad at us. So yeah.
Interesting.
I imagine there's got to be a lot of this has got to be a pretty common inquiry over in like California for people wanting to record stuff or to film for movies or stuff. But I wonder how that varies from state to state, because I've seen a lot of people like here in Colorado record either in like Cheeseman Park or downtown or up in Boulder, up in the mountains. Does it depend if you're like in the city or out of the city?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Each city has their own ordinances, and then counties, and then the state. So usually the state has pretty broad ones. They're not really ever factor in, but like LA County is super specific with like where you need your permits. But like we film a lot in, I'm not supposed to say what city. We're trying to keep it safe, because they don't, that city has an override to where you don't need permits for certain locations. And the reason I'm not supposed to say is because we don't want other film crews coming there at the same time we do to get in our way. So I'm just gonna yes. But
an undisclosed location.
At an undisclosed location in Southern California. Yeah. We find loopholes to work around. But if you do have a permit, because that's the thing, is if you have a permit in most places in LA County, the permits can be pricey. But
I can imagine.
But the bigger cost comes because to get the permit, you need to have production insurance, which can get very pricey, as well as law enforcement on set to keep public locals away, and they come expensive because they're working in their free time. So you can hire them basically as, we jokingly call them mercenaries, but it's off-duty police that come in uniform and are technically have their on-duty powers, but they're off-duty, and so you pay them as private hire, and that ends up being $1,200 for the day. Plus, usually production insurance is at least $1,200 a day, and then the film permits are at least $1,500 a day. It adds up pretty quick. So when you're on a low budget movie, it's like, so yeah.
For low budget movies, does the budget come from like investors? Does it come from like private parties? Is it just people who are self-funding the movie? Like what are
any combination of those? It totally depends. Yeah. Yep.
That makes sense. Yeah. I don't want to get too into the details about your current production, but have you done any have you gotten to work with any like big labels, and like does that affect how well you can get permits if you're like have somebody bigger behind you, or does that
it can. On our current project, we haven't had to do that because it mostly takes place in the forest. So we've been using different parks that are like national parks that don't require the permit for filming, because a lot of it takes place, in an undisclosed forest where the characters are going around and stuff. So we haven't needed to do that. We did film inside of my aunt and uncle's house, and because they have a lot of stuff filmed there for paid, they let us, work with their production company to kind of do that day. Very graciously. Shout out to Beer Boy Productions. So yeah, they very graciously helped us with that, and because we had that label behind them, we were able to get production insurance for that day and everything. And so we did, because we were in their house. We were like, we're getting production insurance that day, but for sure. But yeah, no, mostly because it's been exteriors, we haven't had to worry about that. But yeah, you can definitely try to get people to be like, hey, if we shoot at your small business, we'll put your business logo featured in some of the shots, and then in the credits we'll have your business website and phone number and free advertisement. Yeah, we definitely do stuff like that all the time. Yeah. Because it's all about getting what you can for cheap when you're on an indie movie, because the biggest cost comes into feeding crew, honestly. No, think about it. Every day, if you got a 25-person crew, that adds up. And so it's feeding crew, and then after that, it's paying crew, and then it's lights and equipment, and then other extraneous costs. But when you're going on a bare bones production, it's still.
I imagine, you don't have it. You don't have to pay for like CG horses or anything in the background. So
thankfully not.
You just tell everyone, hey, we have PB&Js for lunch today and tomorrow and the next day.
Just a cup of noodle.
See that you can get, but most people expect it's kind of like the unspoken rule. It has to be catered.
Oh,
yeah. So like we unfortunately we can't get away with just like on some days when we're doing like table reads or like pre-production days where it's all in an office space, we'll get like CPK pizzas and heat those up in the oven and be like, here's lunch. But on set it's got to be like a catered hot meal, and that adds up. So
wow.
Yeah, that's even for a micro budget movie. So yeah, so that ends up being the big cost. So like, I don't know if you saw my tweet the other day, but I jokingly was like, hey, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, all I need is $50K to make my next movie. Like, just comfortably, like, just throw me $50K. I know you can afford it. Like, please. I have not heard back yet, but it was worth a try. But no, realistically, that movie I could crank out for less. The remote investigation, which I do intend to produce later this year. So I'm probably going to crowdfund that, just to raise enough money to pay for the crew's food and stuff, and then pay daily fees and stuff like that for our crew members, because there's really no special effects. Lighting equipment's going to be cheap or else self-provided by people who have it on the crew. So it's going to be a pretty minimalist production.
On that one, how much of it will be through Zoom like this, or you have a camera with them on, like, when they're on the virtual calls?
I want to keep it to about a third of the Zoom stuff here. And of course, I would consult with whoever we bring on as director of photography and editor to figure out what's going to look best and how the technical stuff's going to work there. But I would like a lot of shots of people in their house getting their living environment and seeing how they're reacting to having to work from home, as opposed to just the dialogue in between the two. And I think too, with a lot of directors of photography, they would rather film with their camera as though it were a computer or phone, and then in editing put the two together to make it look better.
Yeah.
So it would be kind of stuff like that. So
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the plan. And then we have, I don't know if you guys have heard about my screenplay Insomniac that I co-wrote with Chad Gloria. That one's about it's like a surrealist noir movie about a detective who has PTSD, who has nightmares. So he's constantly sleep depriving himself. So he's like trying to solve a murder while he's like hallucinating and everything. And so that one we could do for pretty cheap as well. But remote investigation is the easiest. So I think we're going to crank that one out first, and then aim for Insomniac next year. Is kind of the game plan.
All right.
Yeah. So, but I guess this is as good a time as any to announce we are officially in pre-production for Remote Investigation.
Ooh,
It is officially happening. Yes. So
that's exciting.
Yes, very exciting.
Is that the first film that you've written that is in pre-production?
Yes. Because
Cool.
I've produced 2 movies and I have not written either of those movies. I'm just a producer on them.
Got it.
So this will be the first one where it's my screenplay and I am going to direct as well. So,
writer, director. Are you going to give yourself a fancy title since you can?
No. I'm producing it, so I'll be writer, director, producer. I'm not going to act in it at all. I'm going to cameo as the guy who gets murdered. So you don't see him in flashback or anything. It's just photos. So it'll just be some still photos of me. I am going to play Jason Carrier, the guy who gets murdered, the journalist. So that'll be my cameo. Yeah.
I'm sure that'll be very easy to get the licensing for your likeness there.
Yes, it will be. I picked out a song I want to use for the credits, and I've reached out to the band and I haven't heard back yet, but I would like to use that for the song Sun Killer by Spirit Box. I want that to play during the credits. So hopefully I'll find a way to get the rights to that song. So.
Yeah. It's a lot of little it's interesting because I know there's a lot that goes into filmmaking, but there's just a lot more little minutia that you just really don't see from the outside looking in. Yes. All of my experiences in the illustration world pretty much, and I know a bit about animation production, but live action film and even past that, producing an animated project for actual cinema, there's just so many things that you forget how many people have to be involved to make any of these projects happen from the outside when you're just consuming the media.
Yes.
That's my favorite part about being on set, is seeing everything that's happening behind and in some cases in front of the camera. Being a background actor, I vividly remember where it was the third AD was kneeling behind this stone pillar, even though the camera was pointed right at it. It was and then he was waving different backgrounds, okay, now you. And I was when I go watch this, I'm there's a person behind that. And there's a person behind that.
Yeah.
Really, really funny.
I've hidden behind many a dumpster when they yell camera rolling because I'm blocking off traffic, and then they're all right, action. You go scurry behind the dumpster. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. And it makes you appreciate everything that goes on screen as well. When you're watching something, it also kind of ruins it because then you're just thinking of all the things that are going on behind. Ooh, how'd they do that? Or how'd they do that?
To where you can visualize outside of the camera, you can see 360 and be okay, based on what I'm seeing on camera, they've got lights here and here, and there's got to be people set up behind it, and you just kind of can see it, and it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yep.
Huh.
Yep. Yeah, fun stuff. Well, excuse me. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording because I've got to go do location scouting for that movie because we're trying to do a stunt scene that we need more of a what do you call it? I'm dropping on the words now. More of an isolated area to do stunts so we don't run into people. So we are scouting deeper into the forest. So I'm going hiking basically.
Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you for the podcast, everyone. This was great. Appreciate you, Will. Appreciate you, Caleb. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Sure. We will see you next time.
See ya.
All right.